Hi, everybody. Pardon me. I'm sorry. Uh, my name is Bill, and welcome to Billboard Comics. And we have another installment of our sub feature, Girlfriend's Guide to Comics. Um, you might be wondering what happened here. I decided to shave off my goatee and mustache. Not that I'm trying to look younger for you people, because there's only so much I could actually, do to improve this, and I don't think cutting that off really does that. I just stupidly, when I was trying to trim, I sneezed and I took a big hunk out of it. So instead of like sitting here before you with like mostly a goatee and just a little hunk out of there, I decided to uh, take it off so it goes back in. But the thing is, I'm doing this so far in advance that it's going to go back and forth between me having a beard and not having a beard, and so on and so forth. So yeah, so get look. That's something that you keep for loyal watchers of this channel could actually look forward to and get you know enjoy. Um, but we're gathered here today is to one of why we are gathered here today is to go through another aspect of comic book collecting for the significant others of comic book collectors. This is what this whole section is involved for. Not just girlfriends. It could be anybody who has somebody that they want to, who has a friend or husband or wife or daughter or father or mother who collects comic books and wants to get more involved in a hobby with them. Maybe buy them gifts for holidays and get a little bit of information on how to negotiate that. Um, and this week we are going to talk about something that is very controversial for a lot of people. Um, uh, some people consider it the bane of the comic book existence, and it's probably going to be something that's going to kill the comic book industry. Others love it and support it and try to buy as much as possible possibly can. I'm talking about variant comics. Variants, simply put, are uh, comic books that have certain changes that make them different from the main comic book. There's usually like one comic book that's published, and something is involved in it to make it different from all the rest of the same comic books that are published the same month. Um, the same, like it's usually by issue basis, title by title basis. You'll have, like say, a copy of like Captain Whatsits #1 that has a regular comic book of Captain Whatsits like this. And you have a variant one where he is actually flying. You might have another one where he's punching out a guy. Uh, that's what variants are. Nowadays, when people think about variants, they think mainly of variant covers, um, covers with different artwork by different creators to add onto the line. Um, it's not always like that. As a matter of fact, like the first variant covers didn't even have anything to do with artwork at all. Um, tracing back like to like the 70s, Marvel used to use variant covers to test the waters of doing price increases. You might see something around here about like a 30-cent variant or a 35-cent variant. What happened was they, when they're like floating the idea of raising the prices, they put out most of their line with still only 25 cents. Big burst in the corner of the cover, but they pick like two or three major cities like Charleston or um, like Knoxville or something like that. And in those cities, they'd raise the price to 30 cents without telling anybody. There'd be no blast to announce that. They'd just be on the newsstand, 30 cents. And for those towns, it would cost 5 cents more to actually buy that comic book. Um, if people didn't like storm the distributor with pitchforks and torches, they would eventually roll it out for the entire line. You'll see a lot of these involved in like 1970s books about that, and generally changes a basic cosmetic one in the upper uh, left-hand corner um, that says, either the old price or the new price. Um, there's also things called the Whitman variant. Whitman variants are basically um, back in the 60s. DC came up with something called came up with the idea of selling 3 comic books in a plastic bag for a penny cheaper to try like get rid of backstock and also like try like a little bit more money on their comic books. Um, they did this all the way up until about the 60s. And then Marvel started in on the 1968, but DC eventually turned over the access or the selling of these packs to a company called Whitman. Whitman also published, I think, Gold Key Comics and Four Color Comics and a whole bunch of other ones like that. So they were a successful kind of like publishing firm. Um, Western comic books, I think, publishing is also part of their umbrella. But what they would do is they take over the publishing of these packs, and for those 3 packs, instead of having DC Comics in the cover, um, at that time it had like they called it the DC Bullet, which is DC surrounded by a field of stars, like a circular frame of stars. Instead of that, they would just have a black thing that had the Whitman logo, which is a W with a smiley face underneath it, like he's wearing the W as a hat. Um, and usually, sometimes they'd have Whitman in big letters across the on the other opposite side to it. Um, that's to tell you it is in fact a Whitman variant, and this is not the DC comic one. Um, they also would eventually publish some things for Marvel, especially famously the Star Wars comic books. The Star Wars comic books have a lot of Whitman variants, but the agreement with Marvel is a little bit different. Maybe it's because of the trade dress, because instead of just like one tiny little thing they could in the corner they could easily fix, Marvel usually demarked their comic books at the time with a big banner across the top of the cover that says Marvel Comics Group. It's kind of hard to mess with that if you want to. It'd be more expensive to actually reprint all those covers. So instead of like having doing that, they would at the time the corner boxes with the price and the number and everything like that were a rectangle. Um, the Whitman variants would have a diamond shaped instead. Um, you'll probably see something up here like this. Just to demarcate that it is not an official. It was published by Whitman and not by Marvel. Um, for the longest time, I didn't think these would be valuable, but nowadays collectors are starting to look out for them a lot. So um, there's a potential variant for you. Um, Another really famous variant is the Mark Jewelers variant. Um, these were mostly sold on, around, or near military bases. But basically, this was basically the comic book you get anyplace else. But in the centerfold, there was a glossy paper insert of various rings that you could buy. Um, the conventional wisdom is because they put them in there next to military bases so that the young soldiers could put a ring on it, so to say. They'd buy a ring for their hometown honeys uh, or girlfriends or whatever to make sure that they stayed loyal to them while they were overseas, stationed overseas, or even going to a war zone. Um, so that's why the Mark Jewelers were sold at military bases, according to popular wisdom. Um, whether this is 100% true or not, I do not know, but that's what a lot of people say about that. There's other companies, and like U.S. Jewelry Company also had inserts like this, but the main jewelry company was Mark Jewelers, and a lot of people who find these in their comic books consider them to be a little bit more valuable than the regular version of it. Next coming up is the another popular one that came up is the newsstand variant and the direct edition variant. This came in about like around the late 70s, back when comic book stores started to become more common and they started to sell more comic books. Um, Before that, primarily, if you want to get a comic book, it would be through, and they bundle it underneath the term newsstand, but it counts for anything that had that, like drugstores, supermarkets. I did a whole video on where you could find them back in the day. Anywhere you got that would be considered a newsstand. Um, so newsstand usually, like in the 70s, they started having the UPC code that they could actually use as aid them to process their purchases. A lot of stores that have those, like back in that day, they just had like a window. You just put the code over it and beep, and it go into the register. A little bit different today because you'd have like the gun you could shoot at it or whatever. Um, so, but the direct market did not really have this. They basically were a lot of times they were just working out of like a strong box uh, of money or like a register old timey like um, cash register that had nothing like that. They weren't really advanced or any kind of like technologically advanced until like the late 80s or 90s, uh, and you know then they started getting up more up at the times and get like the actual point of sale system that allowed you to scan the um, uh, UPC code. As a result, the early days of this, like the newsstand was more prevalent, obviously, because there wasn't a lot of direct market around. To differentiate between the two, um, direct market would have a slash through the UPC code. There's like a pre-printed code already on it, and that would determine which one was the direct and which one was the newsstand. That later changed from being that's just not having a blank UPC filled with like say a lot popular one was Spider-Man's head or words like DC, be part of DC Nation, or who watches the Watchmen. It was when the Watchmen came out. It was they used to do like little blurbs advertising other stuff in the actual little square where UPC would go. Um, During the early days, like the direct market was more rare than the newsstand, so they have like a little more. That variant has a little more value. But soon, like as the 80s turned into 90s, the situation flipped. Comic books seemed to back out from like the newsstand market and more relied on direct market. So newsstand comic books, which we still had just like the UPC symbol there, would become more prevalent um, and a little harder to get. So that's more expensive variant there. Um, and eventually it became that like when the direct market started getting like the point of sale systems where you could actually use uh, a scanner, it had to differentiate which was direct and which was newsstand by putting direct market or direct edition over the UPC code. Um, that you will see that a lot today. Like it's just like with the newsstand variants, once direct market started up and running, and as they were dying out, it became more and more harder and harder to find because there's less and less of them around. They become more and more valuable for collectors here and there. Um, the start of like the uh, covers is usually it's tied into 1986. Um, the first real recognizable variant cover was the Man of Steel series. It was DC's reimagining of the Superman franchise. It was done by John Byrne, and it would be the first issue featured two covers. One was a close up of Superman's chest, opening his thing to reveal his shield on his costume, and the other one was a more with the camera drawn back and the destruction of Krypton on the back, and him opening a full body shot of him doing that, uh, with like off to the side a little bit, like stuff like that. So you had two variants you could choose from back then. That's the first time I actually recognized having a variant, and I you know even though I didn't keep up with it, I did find myself compelled to buy both variants of that comic book. Um, then the next really major one that I recognized was Justice League number 3 and Firestorm number 61. This was around a time, but I don't know how serious they were considering this, but or they're just doing like just to float the waters and see what happened. They were thinking about maybe changing the term DC Comics to Superman Comics in honor of the um, main character that helped put them on the map. Um, so they came up with variant covers for just these two issues of these two series. Um, and it's kind of weird. It had like similar kind of like trade designs. Like the main Justice League number 1 sees the team backed up against the fence, being surrounded by like these white and red, well, power suits kind of thing. They were turned to be the Rocket Reds, but at the time you didn't know they could have been robots, they could have been whatever. Um, the other one was like basically Captain Marvel and Batman, and Batman's being hauled up in the air by one of the Rocket Reds, and ooh, let me save you. And like there's like more of a tradition, a throwback to the Silver Age um, DC Comics, where you would have a goofy scene on the front cover and some dialogue and back and forth and stuff like that. Um, Same thing with the Firestorm one. The Firestorm main one was basically him fighting, I believe, a typhoon. It was more of a wordless cover that had nothing. Like it's just basically like kind of like a little abstract of him fighting the actual villain. But the variant again features him going against the villain, squaring off, and they're trading barbs back and forth. Nothing ever came of this, but those variants were very rare. They didn't really publish them a lot in a high number, so they're quite valuable today. Depending where you get to, some of my comic bases is worth a couple $100, but I also find online you could find them for like $10 to $15 if you're lucky. So, but they're kind of rare and kind of out there. Um, Let me just read my notes. Thank you. So another famous variant cover was the Marriage of Spider-Man. Um, this took place in Amazing Spider-Man Annual Number 18, and they did two variants of this. They did a variant of like Peter in his civilian identity in a tuxedo marrying Mary Jane Watson. Another one was Spider-Man, and I believe in his black suit, Mary Jane Watson. And one, he was surrounded by all supporting cast. Another one, he had like a showdown between his enemies and I think his allies. Um, and that was another famous variant cover of today. And during that point, it basically variant covers came out when there's something special going on. There's something you need to promote or something like that. However, when the '90s hit, um, the speculator boom hit, and they're trying to all kinds of different kind of sales enticements to bring people in. Not just variants, but like certain comic books had um, holograms on the cover. Some of them had metallic, like 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 in the logo and stuff like this, metallic paint there. One actually had they actually shot a bullet through the comic book, and that was the variant. That was the cover feature that they're using. But they also did like variant covers. Um, X Men number one had about 6 covers. Uh, they had about 5 that you put back to back wraparound covers that made it one big scene, and the sixth was a differently colored version of that same scene, but in a fold out gatefold cover you could do by yourself. Um, Spider Man number one, the first one written by Todd McFarlane, had about 5 or 6 covers, and each one had like kind of like a different kind of like color scheme to actually differentiate from one another. One was all gold webbing, some was all silver webbing, some was like the regular ones with silver writing, silver ink on in the logo and stuff like this. Um, I once had a chance to look at this and um, like my local comic book store had a set of 5 of them on sale for $75 each. I'm like, like one of those things like I would like to have it. I'm not a big variant guy, but just to have them all in one place for that price, I think was pretty reasonable. So, but unfortunately, I missed out, and somebody else took it, and I'm going to have to live with that shame and regret for the rest of my life. Um, but from this, like it became more of a common practice of like variant covers for comic books. Um, I know Avengers vs. X, the big summer blockbuster crossover series where the X Men were fighting the Avengers uh, with the Phoenix Force coming to Earth. Um, they both had different philosophies about what to do with the big ultra dimensional kind of alien person. Um, that was like had every issue had various uh, variant covers, and it seemed to dip a little bit in the 2000s, 2010s, but it's back full force today. It's now a case back in the '80s, you rarely had a variant cover, and usually it's for a good reason, for a special occasion, for a special thing you want to promote. Now every single it's harder to find a comic book that does not have a variant cover than does. I If you have followed me, if you watched the Guiding Lines series I've been doing, it shows exactly how many variant covers they have to work with. You have I mean comment about how Vaporel number one had 50 variant covers, which is amazing, and I can't understand how anybody could actually collect that many covers, or if they do. Um, Probably the truth resides that everybody has a different philosophy towards variant covers if they do collect them, and what they want to do. I mean, certain artists like Sabine Rich and David Nakayama um, are trade fairly regularly in variant covers, and they're really talented artists. They're beautiful artwork and nice people too. If you I've met a couple them both at a near Comic Con once. Um, so they are really like popular artists. So people are just like, I want every variant cover done by David Nakayama. And I try to get a complete set of that. Then there's also variant covers that are, which I like. Um, a couple that I like. There's one I think by um, John David Christopher. I might be wrong with that name. If I am, I'll put the real name up here in front of my forehead so it could cover up my big ugly face. Um, who did comic books that looked exactly like action figures. Like if you saw them hanging on a peg, you think it was from a distance, you think it was an actual action figure with the bubble thing and the character and the glossy action figure in there. It's two dimensional, so it's not really it's a trick of the eye, but I think those are really fun to look at and deal with. But it's also like what I call they call the color bleed or negative space covers, where they have a character who has a predominant color like yellow, and they make the background yellow, and only the accents on their costume that might be blue or red or whatever are popping out. They just seem to blend into the background. I really dig those. I think those are really cool to look at. Um, not that I have a big extensive collection of any of those, either side, but if I was to get heavy into collecting variants, um, I would do that. My opinion towards variants, I don't really. I'm kind of agnostic about it. I'm not anti variants. I'm not pro variants. I have very little control over it because they're going to make variants no matter what. That's how most of the companies these days make their money. You know, that's how Dynamite stays in business by having 50 variants for every number one they have. It's really a pain in the butt for me when I have to put my things in the comic base because like you have to put one in, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, then two's there, then scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, because all the variants are listed after the main one, and it's just like, yeah, okay, putting this in manually will cost me hours of my time. So, but I digress. Um, but if I had to choose, I'd like to just pick like titles that I want or characters I like. I got a couple of David Nakayama's uh, variants. One was Zatanna, and the other one was Captain America, because Captain America is one of my favorites. Zatanna is also one of my favorite characters, so I got covers by them, um, featuring them on it. So there's no really fast and hard rule to collecting variants. I don't think so. Somebody might tell you different, but somebody will tell you their rules of comic book collecting, and I'm more collect what you want, collect what you love, and don't let anybody tell you what you want to collect. Um, so uh, that being said, you need to find out if you're buying for somebody else, uh, like your significant other, your boyfriend or girlfriend, or husband or wife, what kind of variants do they collect if they collect variants at all? They might be the anti-variant club and they don't want to even touch it. So if you bring home a variant cover for any reason, uh, they they might not be too happy. Other might have specific variants that they like, and you bring home the wrong variant, they won't like it either. Um, so check it out with them and just try to get an idea what they want. If they say, oh, I really like the ones by David Nakayama. Oh, I like the ones with the color bleed. Try to focus on those. So you like get those for them if you want to get them or not. Um, yeah, so that's pretty hard to do. Um, Also, you need to know like what kind of variants there are out there. This is actually educational to me because, like I said, I'm not really big into variants, so I didn't realize they were broken down in certain kind of aspects. Um, like open order variants are variant covers that you could have your local comic book store hold for you. You don't need to have a like like to have your hope that your comic book store buys 100 copies of an issue so they could get this variant in. This is ordered directly from like whatever distributor it is, Penguin or Lunar or Diamond if they're still going to be in it after they got bought out. Um, and you can just get them whenever you want. These are usually the cheaper ones there. They usually don't really appreciate and value all that much because they're as common as they want to be. Everybody who wants one could possibly get one. Um, and it's kind of like made to order. So like you could like if you order it, you'll get a copy there. Um, they usually don't send them as unless they're the actual comic book store requests it. And depending on your comic book store, they might not actually request to have variant covers in there if they're not going to sell. So um, it's not easy to pin down the rarity of it. Um, depends on the situation in the store and everything like that. But they're less rare than some of the other ones on the list, because if you want them, you can just order them, and you can probably just get them for a cover price. That's you can find some of these in like dollar bins and stuff like that. I got like a Captain America variant by George Perez in a dollar bin once. I was like, yippee! My favorite artist. Um, as for the Avengers, on an Avengers book, there's a variant cover for the Avengers book. Uh, my favorite artist doing my favorite character on my favorite book. How did I miss this? And I'm glad I did because I got it for $2 less. Um, but I digress. Um, the next step is the uh, incentive variants. These are this is like forced rarity. This is like um, it's kind of like it's again it's there's no hard and fast rule saying like, okay, well, 1 in 10 is cheaper than 1 in 25. It typically is, but it all depends on rarity. I mean, like there could be like a case of like a book that it knows not going to sell that gets like a 1 in 25 variant. um, Nobody's going to buy 25 copies of the book. So therefore, the 1 in 25 variant is going to be just as expensive as the 1 in 50 or the 1 in 100, because nobody's going to, not a lot of comic book stores are going to buy that. So there's not a lot of those variant covers in circulation. Um, but like good rule through, like I said, like the higher up you get into like the actual ratio, um, 1 in 10 is easier to find usually than 1 in 25. 1 in 25 is usually easier to find than 1 in 50. 1 in 50 is usually easier to find than 1 in 100, and so on and so forth. There's some variants that are like 1 in 1,000 that are really hard to find. Um, Usually, you won't even find them in your local comic book store. You probably only big time like vendors like Midtown Comics or Mile High Comics or um, like discount comic book services would have access to these because they are so rare. Um, but you will have a hard time finding them unless you have a connection that actually deals in variant comics and know where to find them. And the third one variant category is retailer variants. And as I said, like in that the guidelines column, you have um, certain retailers have certain agreements with Marvel and with DC and other companies, and they have certain like partnerships with artists, and the artist agrees to make a comic exclusively for their company, uh, uh, for one of the major books of the week or the month or whatever. I know, like I think Comic Traders, one of my favorite whatnot sellers, has these kind of relationships with people. I think like David Nakayama is, if not exclusive with them, does a lot of various covers for them. And they have a long list of other artists whose names escape me, but if you show up to one of our auctions, you'll hear their names mentioned often. So basically, that's their variants uh, that they can only sell on in their stores or on their online presence, either their eBay store or their whatnot auctions. Um, and it's not just the comic book stores. Certain comic book creators have their own access to having their own variant covers and stuff. J. Scott Campbell usually gives 5 or 6 uh, variant covers for certain issues that he might be interested in, and you can only get these comics drawn by him at his web store. Clayton Crane is another one who does this. So it's not just exclusively like um, stores that are attached to like actual comic book stores. It could be stores attached to like actual artist's website to try to get them. Um, so that's like if you need to find them, like you have to look around. Certainly, you have to be knowledgeable about who is putting out the variant, um, or what ratio it is, or so on and so forth. If you were trying to buy the variant for somebody else, um, it's that there's all kinds of different variations, even with this stuff. Like you'll have trade dress variant, which has like the logo of the comic book on it. Then you have virgin variants, which is just clean. It's just the art image, and it doesn't even tell you what issue number it is or what title it is or whatever. You had to look on the back for it. Um, that's another kind of sub branding of variants. Um, like I said, there's a whole wide variety of variants going out there, of variant covers going out there nowadays. all different kind of manner of kind of like comic book creators and um, stuff along those lines that would make it a little difficult to keep track of. Uh, I'm starting to get like a nosebleed just talking about it, and I'm just trying to explain it to you. Um, but if your loved one is into variant covers, um, again, a lot of this is like stuff to like have a discussion with them to what kind of variants he likes. But at least hopefully this helps you to let you know where to look for these variants and what to expect and how to get these variants and you know what makes a 1 in 25 different than a Clayton Crane retailer web store variant. Um, so you know where to look and where to go. You don't waste your time trying to look for one on eBay, which you can't find because, or you might be able to get cheaper at another place and not waste so much money. Um, so that's it for now. I I will be back next week with another edition of Girlfriend's Guide to Comic Books. Um, if you like this, please hit the like. If you want to find out more about the world of comic books, hit subscribe. And if you have any questions about variants and I can maybe answer, put it in the comments section. And like we can maybe figure that out and we can work it out together. Or if somebody else comes by and has the answer, maybe they could help us out and do that. We could start a conversation and a discussion about the world of variant comics and how to help our novices and outsiders how to negotiate the world of comic book variants. Um, Join us tomorrow for another installment of Growing Up Comics. Um, and I might be back after that for various and sundry kind of videos. Um, until then, have a good day and keep collecting.